something that is in the sky and it's a rainbow. And unicorns ride on rainbows. Do you know it's actually a circle that the ground actually gets half of it and the other part is actually on the bottom of the ground? Really, really, really big, and you can't measure it. It's circle kind of shape. 1,350, 150.
50 what?
50 big. Pink ring with silver and purple. The one in the front lawn. Probably one on the outside looking at the moon.
Cute kids, right? You know, at some point in our lives, very early on, younger probably than even the kids there, before we're even conscious of it, we set to work to begin to construct a picture of what we believe will be a good life. For some of us who are planners, this is a very intentional process. We do it very systematically, very thoroughly. For others, it's a little more intuitive. We follow our gut. For some of us, we simply take the picture that someone else handed down to us, someone else's picture, and we make it our own. But we all do this. We begin to construct a picture, and we think about things like, what kind of career do I want to have? Who do I want to be partnered with? Where do I want to live? You know, city or country? What part of the nation, what part of the world, what kind of place do I want to live in? What's the architecture look like, right? We make that a part of our picture. We think about family. Do I want a family of kids, a family of pets, a family of friends? We think about leisure. What do I want my leisure life to look like? Hobbies and travel and toys. We, again, maybe systematically, maybe it's a little more haphazard, but we all begin to construct a picture of what we believe will make for a good life. And then we put it up on our mental mantles, or maybe our physical mantles, or maybe for some of us, we put it up on our vision boards, and we get after it, trying to make that picture into a reality. Just to share with you, this is my picture. This is a picture that I've had in mind ever since I was a very young man. A couple of you in the back row are in this picture. This is my family, and we took this picture several years ago. My kids were a lot smaller then, and I remember this day so vividly. I remember this day at a park, taking this picture. We had all of the kids we were gonna have at that time. Jocelyn and I are the creepers there in the back, looking through them, if you couldn't tell that. And I remember this day just saying, oh my gosh, having this moment where I realized this mental picture that I've been carrying around since I was a young boy is now a reality. I've got a family that is happy and healthy, and there's lots of love. They're loved and they're loving, and I just remember my kids just being so happy. I mean, these smiles were authentic that day. They were having a great time, and I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, that picture that I've had in mind of what I wanted for my life, of what a good life, a happy life would look like, I'm living it. I even have the money to hire a photographer to chase us around a park and to take a picture, a very overpriced picture, but we love the picture, so we've gotten our time out of it. Now, I realize that I'm fortunate because for me, I got a chance to see that mental picture come to life. And I know for some of us, we have a picture in mind and it never becomes an actual reality. It remains out of our reach, out of our grasp. I know that's frustrating, but let me tell you this, even for those of us who get our picture, who have our picture become a reality, there comes this moment in life, and it happens so often, I would argue that it is a universal moment. There comes this moment when we take a look around and we realize, although we have pursued our picture with intensity, in full expectation that once we had it, life would be good, suddenly we discover that maybe our dream house is too small. Or we notice our kids grow up and they grow distant. Or our job becomes stagnant and boring, no longer inspiring. Or maybe our marriage does the same. Or the money runs out. Or even if it doesn't run out, maybe it doesn't buy all of the good feels that it once did. It was supposed to be good. But even when you get it, it doesn't always feel good, does it? Or maybe it feels good for a little while, but the goodness doesn't last. It doesn't keep. And what do we do with that? See, there's a whole book of the Bible called Ecclesiastes, that is framed by this very kind of disillusionment. It's written by a wealthy and wise king. We believe him to be Solomon. He just identifies himself as the Koheleth. It's a Hebrew phrase. Say that, Koheleth. Koheleth, say it. Koheleth, yeah, you just learned Hebrew today at home, Koheleth, right? It means teacher, sometimes translated poet. He identifies himself as a teacher, as a wealthy and wise king. We believe it to be Solomon. But it's a book that hits us where it hurts, especially in the over 40 crowd. Many see this as a depressing book because it says things like this over and over again. It says, everything is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. In other words, you can never catch it. Or it says, nothing can be gained under the sun. That's what we're gonna study for the next several weeks. Now, I know what you're thinking. After months of coronavirus, after economic ruin, after a nation that's torn apart, a world that's torn apart in pain and grief over racism and violence, this is what we're gonna talk about in church? Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because although we fear being disillusioned, disillusionment can be one of the best things that ever happens to us, as we'll see through Ecclesiastes. So we're gonna start in chapter 2, not chapter 1, but chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. Let's listen to the words of the Koheleth. He says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, it's madness. And what does pleasure actually accomplish anyway? I tried cheering myself with wine, who hasn't? And embracing folly, just kind of lightheartedness, madness, not taking life so seriously. But all along the way, my mind was still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days, the short time that they have here on this earth. Now, do you notice what he's setting out to do? In a very systematic, disciplined, planning kind of way, the Koheleth says he's going to help figure out, did you notice the question? He's gonna help figure out what is good. What is good for us to do while we're living our lives? What makes for a good life? What picture should we all be painting? And he's doing it in a very disciplined way. But before we get there, I want to ask you, how are you trying to answer this question for yourself? For you, is it about wealth or property? Is that what is good? If so, then why is it that the things that you own, they make you happy for a little while, but why doesn't that happiness last? Or is it about fame and success? If that's the case, why are there so many famous, successful people who are absolutely miserable? Is it about pleasure or a good time? Then why is there such thing as the law of diminishing returns? Why does something pleasurable for a minute, but why does it diminish over time? It gets less and less and less able to satisfy. Or is it something more noble? Is it service to God and others? I mean, I know this has been a big driver in my life. That's what a good life means. It means serving God and serving people. And it sounds right. It sounds like what people of faith should want to do. And I think there is something right about it. And yet, it's not all it's cracked up to be either. And if you don't believe me, just look right now. The depression, the burnout, and the suicide rates amongst pastors, at least in America, it is alarmingly high. So is it about family? Is it about kids? If that's the case, why is my dinner table so often a war zone? And why do I want to escape? Or what is it? How have you answered this question? What is it for you? And for those of you who maybe aren't to this place in life yet, you're still constructing your picture. What is it that you imagine will lead you to a life that is actually good? Now, here's what you need to know. Here's what's so valuable about the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon, in all of his wisdom, guided by a supernatural wisdom, all of his wealth and resources, sets about systematically to test all of these things to see what is truly good. And look what he says, at least at the beginning of his answer, chapter 2. He says this: so I undertook great projects, right? I left a legacy, I achieved things, I left things behind me that the world would see. I tried to make the world a better place. And here's what I did. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs, and some of us are proud of the water feature we put in our backyard. Here's the guy who made reservoirs. I mean, makes you feel small, doesn't he? I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves that were born into my house. I owned, so not just projects or achievement, but ownership, property, wealth. I owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. Not hyperbole, this is an actual king. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well. The delights of a man's heart. So you got projects, achievement, you've got wealth, you've got pleasure. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me, which is why we believe this is Solomon. We know him to be the greatest, wisest, wealthiest king. He says, in all this, though, I didn't lose myself as we might, chasing after our dreams. We might lose ourselves. He says, in all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done, right? When I stepped back and I looked at the picture that I had been working so hard to create, when I saw all that I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read these words, I think, poor Solomon, he needs a hug, right? Or some Prozac. He needs something. This kind of talk is scary to us. When people start talking this way, we don't like it. It makes us very, very uncomfortable. We get concerned, and maybe we should be concerned, but maybe not. Because here's what I'll tell you, that this kind of disillusionment is absolutely necessary if we ever want to truly experience a life, not that we think is good, but a life that is truly good. And maybe the blah, that prevailing just blah, that meh, that we feel in life isn't a sign that there's something wrong with us or wrong with our brain chemistry. Maybe it's a sign there's something wrong with the pictures that we create. And the problem with the pictures we have constructed is that if we're gonna construct a picture of what the good life is, the first problem is that we don't actually know what is truly good. Now, maybe that sounds crazy to you. Knowing what's good, that should be easy. That's obvious. That's intuitive, right? But it's actually never been easy. You can go back to the very beginning of time, go back to the book of Genesis, go back to the garden, Adam and Eve, our first parents living in paradise. Everything there was good by God's design. And yet into the middle of that goodness comes a proposition, a temptation. Genesis 3, I'll look at this quickly. Some of you know this narrative. Now the serpent, the tempter, was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Eve, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? He starts with a lie. And she says, no, that's not right. We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the center, the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. You will not certainly die, the serpent said. For God knows that when you eat from this tree, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Notice this? Notice the proposition. Now, here's the thing about life in the garden. Life in the garden was already good. Adam and Eve were not chasing after the good life. They had it. It was served up to them by God on a silver platter. It was theirs. The proposition, the temptation is not, hey, if you eat this, you're gonna have the good life. The proposition, the temptation was, if you eat this, you'll be able to get the good life for yourself. But in order for you to get the good life for yourself, look what has to happen. Before you can get it for yourself, before you can create a picture and chase after it, you have to know what is good and evil. Before you can have the good life, you have to know what the good life is. If you're gonna get it for yourself, first you have to know the difference between good and evil. But here's what I'll submit. Although they took the deal, it was a bad deal. This was a bill of goods, and we shouldn't be surprised that the tempter, the evil one, would lie to deceive these people, because at the end of it, they ate the fruit, yes, but they didn't get what was promised. They didn't get the ability to know the difference between good and evil. And if they did, it sure didn't last, and they sure didn't pass it along to us, because here we are all these generations later, and we still have so much trouble distinguishing between good and evil, not only in the actions that we take, but even in the smallest things that happen to us, interpreting the things that happen to us, right? In the small things. How many of you had this experience? You made plans with someone, and immediately after you make plans, you go, oh, why did I do that? Right? You make plans with someone and you're like, every time I'm with those people, that person, it's a miserable time. It's a bad time. But you made the plan, you felt bad, you made the plan, and the day comes and you're dreading it. You're like, this is gonna be a bad time. It's always a bad time. And then you go and you do the thing and you actually have the time of your life. Has that ever happened to you? Okay, 2 people in the sanctuary. Anyone at home? I don't think they're awake in here. I'm trying. How about the flip of that? How often do you look forward to something? You're so excited about something. There's a celebration, or there's a trip, or a night out, or a vacation, and you're like, it's gonna be the best time ever. And it turns out to be a nightmare. Ever had that happen? Oh, suddenly, now you're with me. Okay, at home, yeah. And this is from a man who's about to take my family on vacation in about 6 hours. So you can pray for me. I'm not sure how that's gonna work out. Or has this ever happened? You experience something hard and you think, this is the worst thing ever. No good could ever come from this. And in the moment, you're absolutely convinced that is true. Maybe it's a job loss, maybe it's a breakup, maybe it's a diagnosis. But over time, you realize that somehow you were wrong. We don't know. And I think of this old Chinese fable. Steve Hauer, our pastor emeritus, my mentor, he shared it with me years ago, and it's always stayed with me. It's a story about an old Chinese farmer. He had worked the land for many, many years. And one day he woke up to discover that his horse, his only horse, his beloved steed, had run off. And his neighbors heard about it, and they came over to console him, and they said, such bad luck. And the man said to them, maybe. Well, the next day the horse returned, and it brought with it 3 wild horses. And the neighbors heard the news, and they came and they said, let's celebrate. What great fortune. And the farmer said, maybe. The next day, his son, trying to ride one of these untamed horses, was thrown and he broke his leg. And the neighbors came again and they offered their sympathies to the man for what had happened to his son and said, oh, this is so terrible. And he said, maybe. Because then the following day, officers from the military came through town drafting young men into the army to fight in a war, and they took one look at his son and saw his broken leg and realized he was in no shape to fight, and they left him there. And the neighbors, they gathered and they congratulated the farmer on how well everything had turned out. To which the farmer responded, maybe. Now, there's something about that story that makes you crazy, doesn't it? Maybe it seems so ambivalent, so apathetic. Is this all the guy can say? But I find it to be such an honest, such a true to life fable. Maybe is often the best we can say. And I know for me, this gets to part of the mystery of my life as I reflect on my life so far, just so far. Jocelyn, sitting way over there all alone, Jocelyn sent me a link not too long ago to a childhood trauma inventory. She kind of knows some things about how I grew up, and she was like, oh, I'd be curious about this. And it's called the ACE test, the ACE test. And so I took it, and I scored really high. I'm an overachiever in lots of areas of life, including a childhood trauma test. But unfortunately, a high score is kind of like golf. It's technically not a good score. You want to score low on this thing. And I looked at that, and it didn't surprise me. And yet, here's what I've noticed. This is one of the great mysteries of my life. How can it be that as I look back over my life and I see all these things that have happened, many things that rightly could be called evil, they've been unfortunate things, they've caused pain, they've caused grief, they've caused suffering, on all human accounts, they are evil. How can it be that somehow they've been used for my good? How can it be that they've benefited me? How can that be? And how can it be that this young man I once knew, who was given before his birth a trust fund that has more money in it than any amount of money I will ever make in my entire working lifetime, and it was given to him by family who wanted to see him thrive. They wanted to bless him in his future. How could it be that as he became a young man, he said that trust fund, which he once thought was his greatest blessing, was now turning out to be his greatest curse? How can that be? It's because we don't really know what will turn out for our good or our evil. If we're honest, at best, all we can say is a faith-filled maybe. And from what I understand from Genesis chapter 3, what we actually got that day in the garden when we took the fruit was not the ability to know good from evil. It was the false sense that we now know good from evil, that yes, we now know, we can figure it out. And so now we go through life and we arrogantly slap labels on things, on people, on experiences. This is good, this is bad, this is awesome, this is terrible, as if we know, but we do not know what we are talking about, do we? And if you think I'm crazy, or if you think this is some game of semantics, or you're worried that I've lost my mind and this is all relativity, moral relativity, let's talk for a minute about Good Friday. My kids consistently to this day, even though they're preachers' kids, pastors' kids, they consistently get confused between Good Friday and Black Friday. Here's what they say. They say, Good Friday, why wouldn't you call the day where you get to go to the stores and you get amazing deals, you get to buy your loved ones Christmas presents, which is, the day Jesus was born. Why wouldn't you call that day Good Friday? And I said, well, because it's, black, it's profit margin, they're in the black, retailers are finally making money, and they're like, I'm not buying that, should be called Good Friday. And why on earth would you call the day that you take the Son of God and bloodthirsty, petty, jealous, violent humans take the Son of God and they nail him to a cross? Why wouldn't you call that Black Friday? Make a good case, don't they? I mean, if you can figure anything out, it's this. Half off TVs, good. The death of the Son of God, bad. Some things in life may be confusing. That should be pretty clear. And yet, what do we see? What do we see about Good Friday? This day that in our minds is just horrible. It's dark. Somehow God took that Friday, that tragic Friday, that grief-soaked Friday, that dark, unjust, sinister Friday, and he made it into the best Friday that there ever was. And we are people who love our Fridays, right? God took this Friday that was just filled with darkness and tragedy. We'd look and we'd say, if there was ever a bad Friday, that was the Friday. And yet what does God do? God turns that Friday into a Friday where we finally get to see how much we're loved. We get to experience how valued we are, that God would give the life of his Son in exchange for us, that we're worth more than 1,000 TVs. That's the day where we see our redemption unfold for us. God takes what we would believe to be a very black, dark Friday, and he turns it into the hope of the world. Which means we've got to stop running around pretending we know the difference between good and evil We don't. Not apart from the wisdom of God. But here is one thing we can know. I mean, if we can't even know this, then what can we know? If we can't figure out what's good and evil, if we can't put labels on it, then what can we actually know in life? Here is the thing that you can know. Regardless of whether you believe your circumstances to be good or evil, full of light or full of darkness, here's one thing you can know. Here's one thing you can count on, that God can't stop being good. In times that you would call times of blessing, he can't stop being good. In your darkest moments, God can't stop being good. I want you to hear the poetry of Psalm 145. The psalmist writes, "The Lord is gracious and compassionate." And I just want to pause there for a minute. That means that when the Lord looks across our planet and he sees the pain of our world right now globally, as people are crying out to be heard, injustices are crying out to be fixed, he sees it and he's moved to compassion. As God looks at your life and he sees the pain that you're living in, God sees it and he's moved to compassion. The Lord is gracious and compassionate. He's slow to anger, but he's abundant, he's abounding, he's rich in love. The Lord is good to all. And he has compassion not just on a few, but on all he has made all the time. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. He will not make a promise and fail to keep it. He will not say he's going to do something and then fail to do it. He's trustworthy, he's faithful. The Lord upholds all who fall, and he lifts up all who are bowed down. If you find yourself in a place where you're just on the ground, you're bowed down in a place of humility or in despair, look at this promise. The Lord upholds you. He lifts you up. Not only that, kind of pivots here and talks directly to God. The eyes of all look to you, O God, and you give. As we're looking to you with need, God, you give. You don't withhold. You give them their food. You give us our food at the proper time. You open your hand. You're not close-fisted. You're not stingy, but you open your hand and you satisfy the desires of every living thing. See, God can't stop whatever we want to call things, whatever we think we're experiencing, whatever we think we know. The truth is, God can't stop being good. And that's why we call this series Making Rainbows. Because long before rainbows stood for all the things that they stood for, they were first and foremost a promise, a covenant between God and us at a very, very dark moment. If you've ever heard the story of Noah, you know about the story that there was this moment where God annihilated most of the human species, and he only left a few survivors and a bunch of animals. And in that moment, I mean, gosh, can you imagine living through that? In that moment, you must be looking up into the heavens and saying, what kind of monster are you? And you must be looking at your fate thinking, this is horrible, this is bad, how could this ever be good again? And yet what God does is he sets a rainbow into the sky. And it's his way of saying to the people, I know this looks bad right now in every way. I know you believe me to be bad. I know you believe me to be a monster. I know you think this is the worst thing that could ever happen, but I'm promising you right now that I am good, and I promise that I will show you my goodness. You will see my goodness again. In that horrifying moment, God smiles at the world by putting a rainbow in the sky, and he's done so ever since. And God is the God who has created all the scientific principles of the world, and he's made light be divided of all the different spectrums, all the different colors that our eyes have the ability to see, only those in the visible spectrum, and he keeps doing it for us, right? So often after there's a terrifying storm that rips through our community and we fear for our lives, or we see our community damaged, or we see that lives are lost, and we cry out and we say, what's going on? This is so bad. God, are you there? Are you good? He still puts a rainbow in the sky as a promise to us that whatever we think, whatever we interpret, whatever label we're slapping on the moment we're experiencing, he can't stop being good to us, that we can expect to see his goodness. See, I wonder how often I completely miss what's actually good because in my very wise mind, I think I know already that it can't be good. I'll say that again. I wonder how often I completely miss what is actually good because I've already decided in my very wise mind that it can't be good. And for some of us, maybe that means staying in a loveless marriage. You think, why on earth would I stay in a loveless marriage? What good could ever come from this? Or maybe that's forgiving someone who has really hurt you. I mean, hurt you in a deep way where you still bear those wounds. You're still working through the trauma of that. And you say, why would I ever lay down my right for justice? Why would I ever give them the gift of forgiveness? Why would I ever do that? What good could come from me laying down my right to vengeance and forgiving? Or maybe it's, why would I ever take the things that could bless my family and make my life richer, make my life better? Why would I ever take those things and give them away to someone else? Why would I ever be generous with those things? What good could come from me living with less and giving that away so other people could live with more? That doesn't make any sense. How could that be good? See, I wonder how often I miss out on what is actually good because I have already decided in my very wise mind that whatever it is, that it can't be good. And yet I think about all the times I was convinced that something I was going through was bad and I was surprised by the goodness of God. I wonder at this moment in our world, 2020, right? I had such high hopes for 2020. And now I'm like, what's next? Right? It's gonna be an alien invasion, right? It's the only thing that's left. And yet in this moment where so much seems wrong, it feels like we're living through one of Earth's worst moments. Could God be doing something good right now in the midst of it? Maybe. We can say better than maybe, can't we? We can say yes and amen because God has made a promise. Amen? He's made a promise that he can't stop being good no matter what we perceive. He is always good and he will work out his goodness even in the darkest moments. Now to be clear, I'm not talking about moral relativism here. I'm not saying, hey, in life you can't know good from evil, so just do whatever you want. God has said in his scriptures that he has told us much of what it means to do good and that we should live our lives trying to do good. But when it comes to the pictures we paint of a good life, the reason our disillusionment can be glorious is that in those moments of disillusionment, those moments are the end of the arrogance that has plagued us from the garden, where we lay down our sense that we even know what's good and evil. And in our disillusionment, that can be the beginning of simply opening ourselves up to experience by God's gracious hand that which is truly good. I want to pray for that right now. God in heaven, we look to you right now. The eyes of all look to you. God, we look to you for blessing, for help. We look to you for direction. We look to you for hope. And God, in looking to you, that means we want to be done in looking to ourselves, leaning on our own understanding, trusting in our discernment, trusting in our ability to know what's good and evil, trusting in God, we just lay down our arrogance. God, we lay down the haughtiness that we carry around with us every day that makes us think that we can know and we get to decide what's good and evil and we get to call the shots. God, instead, as we lay down our arrogance, as we humble ourselves before you, we look to you. And God, we ask that you would show us in this moment where you're working. God, give us an unwavering faith in your goodness. God, if we are to the place of hopelessness and despair, if our disillusionment has crossed over into despair, God, Send us a rainbow in the sky to remind us that you're with us, that we are not forsaken, that you're for us, and that even though it looks bad, you can't stop being good. And then, God, give us the humility, give us the faith to look at the world through what we might even call rainbow-colored glasses, to be able to see the world through the lens of hope, expectation, faith, love, optimism, that you're with us, you're fighting for us, we are not alone, and you will bring us to what is good if we trust you. God, let us lay down our arrogance and put on faith instead, to trust in your goodness. We pray in the name of Jesus, the one who shows us how good you are. Amen.